Okay, so this is now part 2 of lecture 3, and we're looking at the occasions of writing Romans. Paul wrote this letter just before he departed from Jerusalem, while spending the winter in Corinth. The date of writing is approximately 57 AD. Paul's ministry in the East was now finished, and he was beginning to aim at Western Europe. In this letter, he asks for help en route to Spain, as I was explaining. He may also have had time for some major reflection on the gospel message and sought an opportunity to write down his theological thoughts, almost like a well thought out thesis or work that he was working at, okay? Because he spent, as you will see, he spent 18 months with the church in Corinth, okay? So, he probably had quite a lot of time to start thinking about this, thinking about for himself, and how do I teach the church about it? How do the church now going to use this in being united as a church, in dealing with each other, in being stewards and all that kind of stuff, okay? Because these are early churches, and those churches were really made up. It was like a potpourri, a pot of different cultures that were in there, okay? He may also have had time for some major, as I said, major theological thought. He may also have been concerned about some false teaching doing the rounds, and decided to give spiritual direction to the church in Rome. You must remember that a lot of the people in Rome were non-Jews believers, which means that they were idol worshippers. I mean, the Romans were highly influenced by the Greeks. The Greeks had different gods. There's a whole Greek mythology. If you remember the Greek mythology, Apollos and Augustus and Ophelia and Aphrodite and all these different gods, and the Romans borrowed a lot of that, okay? I'm busy watching at the moment this series called Rome, and it's about the time that we're talking about. It's actually Julius Caesar is now trying to take Rome away from what's his name? One of the other guys, Pompey, and Pompey is now moving away, and he's actually trying to find refuge in Greece. And it's all about the Roman centurion. And on Sunday at the service, we're going to be looking at the book of James as we carry on, and we're actually going to look at the different classes. Okay, the aristocrats and the slaves and all of that, and it's so nicely portrayed in this series called Rome. And you can see there that they have gods for different things, and you could choose it and go, I'm going to follow these 4 gods, and you worship these gods. Okay, now all of a sudden you believe in Jesus, but it's not easy to just get rid of your gods. Okay, so a lot of that was now coming into this newfound faith. Plus, you've got the Jews who came from a very strong law and all of that, are also believers in Christ. So Paul has quite a lot of job in guarding this new church. Okay, broad outline of Romans: introduction, themes, sin and the lostness of humankind. Righteousness is by faith alone. So the big discussion was that because of a lot of these faith, in this church you have Gentiles who did works for their gods. They sacrificed things for the gods, okay? And you had these Jews that also did a sacrifice, okay, for this God. Now Paul comes and he says, no, this is not, this new faith in Jesus has got nothing to do with what you're going to do for God, but it's what He has done for you. Okay? And it's only by faith alone, and Paul is very strong on that. Okay? And you will see, especially the guys in my church, when we do the book of James, James talks a little bit about that you need to work at your faith. And there's often been a misunderstanding, because people think that James is saying, wait a minute, but I thought it's not about works. But Paul talks about it's by faith. Why is James talking about works? James is talking about you need to work at your faith. You can't just say, okay, I believe, and then sit back and relax. Okay, you need to exercise that faith, and that's what James is talking about. So he gives a lot of talk here in chapters 3 and 4 about righteousness by faith alone. A life of freedom, free from sin and law. You see, he talks about the law because the Jewish guys will know all about the law. Free to live in the Spirit. So to the Jewish audience in that church, he's saying, you don't have to. You know, if you keep the Sabbath, you keep the Sabbath because you want to, not because you have to. Because didn't Jesus said Sabbath was not created for men, but men for Sabbath? Okay. The Israel of God and practical implication of living by faith. And then the greetings at the end of it. General themes in Romans: all mankind is lost, Jews and Gentiles alike. Okay, so there is no Jew or Gentile. This is everyone. If you believe in Christ, you have to be washed by the blood of Jesus. Okay, it doesn't matter if you're a Jew or a Gentile. You go through the cross. Justification by faith and faith alone. Again, you are justified, you are made right because of your faith, not because of what you've done. Because there's nothing that you can do. That's why God sent His Son. That whoever believes in Him shall have life everlasting. Okay. The importance of dealing with sin and life, living a holy life. The practical implication of living by faith. Dedication to God, being a good citizen, respecting the weaker brother. And we will look at, if you're here on Sunday, we're going to talk a lot about this weak and strong thing. Okay. Romans 16. Romans 15:33 looks like an ending, but it continues with Paul greeting 26 persons in chapter 16 in a church that he did not plant and never visited before. This has led many scholars to query the authenticity of chapter 16. Was it added later, perhaps by a different person? So what is our response to that? Well, there's very little doubt that Paul wrote this epistle, because if you look at the structure, okay, it's very, very much of Paul. There are no problems of a text critical nature in chapter 16. So remember those who did module 2 when we talked about textual criticism. And textual criticism is basically people who try to criticize the Bible because it doesn't fit in certain mold, okay? And when you look at chapter 16, it fits everything that we spoke about Paul. The way he writes, where he was writing it, to whom he was writing it, why he was writing it. So from a textual criticism point of view, there is actually no leg to stand on, okay? Rome was a universal city, and many people whom Paul knew, directly or indirectly, may have moved there or may have gone through Rome. Okay? So for example, like I was talking about earlier, this guy who came through here, he got my email address through a guy in Durban. That guy has never been to Queenstown. But he knew that I was in Queenstown, and he knew me. And he said, you know what, try this guy. Okay? I know a lot of people in Cape Town. I've been twice in Cape Town. The last time I was in Cape Town was 16 years ago. But I know at least 25 people in Cape Town, their addresses, where they are, and all that kind of stuff. So I can easily, you know, if you say to me, phew, I'm going to Cape Town, but I don't know anyone in Cape Town, I said to you, you know, which part of Cape Town? Because I can direct you there, okay? And mostly it's people within churches. So even if you're moving to Cape Town and you want to go to a church, I can give you a list of churches because I know the ministers, because they studied with me or we ministered together. So the same thing is here, okay? Just because he wasn't there doesn't mean he cannot minister into there, okay? Paul needed to establish some credibility with the church he had not planted, therefore the names of people known to both himself and the church. Okay, and we all do that, name dropping. Right? Have you ever find yourself name dropping? You know, and so, well, you know, if you're a friend with a guy, then you're my friend. You know, because you know me, And if he is my friend and you my friend, then there's a common thing. Okay, and you'll see just now how Paul uses it to his advantage. So if you've never read the book of Romans, do yourself a favor, read some of these, and you will get a better understanding of the book of Romans. Let's move to the Corinthians and letters to a troubled church. And the location, if you look behind me on the map, you'll see that's basically the region of Corinth. In antiquity, Corinth was a city-state. On the easternmost of Corinth, the narrow stretch of land that joined this name to the mainland of Greece. To the west of the easternmost lies the Gulf of Corinth. To the east lies the Saronic Gulf. Corinth is about 78 kilometers, 48 miles, southwest of Athens. Okay, so that's not too far from Athens, not too far from the capital city. Okay, so a lot of people from the capital city will travel there. Okay, also it says in ancient times travelers would travel by ships over the rocky ridges or sledges. And now it has been actually made into a canal. Okay, so again, you're going to have all these boats, all these ships moving across. At one point, they're going to need to stop. Okay, and it was basically like almost like a drive-through town. I was saying earlier this morning that I don't know if Queenstown or the people in Queenstown knows how strategically this town is. In the almost 2 years that I've been there, I've had two friends that I've known from Johannesburg. They were on the way to Port Elizabeth or Cape Town, and they were driving through here. They said, listen, we're driving on this day through Queenstown. Do you want to meet for lunch? Okay, and it's very much a drive-through town. Okay, and I don't know if we as churches realize the importance of it. Okay, and ministry opportunities that we can have for these people that are driving through. Okay, for example, hospitality can be a huge ministry opportunity for those who are driving through this town. Okay, and that was the same thing in Corinth. Okay, except then they wouldn't drive through town, they will sail through town. Okay, or they will go on a boat, ride on a boat through town. Okay. The city of Corinth, this is a temple of Apollo in ancient Corinth. Apollo was one of the gods in the Greek mythology, and this was a temple that was dedicated to him, and the remainder of the temple that's still standing. Corinth was the largest city of Greece and capital of Achaia, an important city for commercial and social exchange. So that's important because people were there selling things, buying things from different parts. You got a church in there, you can make a huge impact. There was a sizable Jewish community that lived in Corinth. It became infamous for its immorality, temples, and sinfulness, as can be seen from this quote. The lower city was the location of the temple of Apollo, while the whatever was dominated by the temple of Aphrodite. Okay, now do you know anything about Aphrodite? Who was she? Hey? Yeah, she was also the goddess of lust. Yeah, and what was happening if you were to go to her temple as a sacrifice, you would actually sacrifice a virgin. A young girl who was a virgin, you will actually sacrifice. So the men will have sex with her and then kill her as a sacrifice to her. You will know the word aphrodisiac. Okay, and aphrodisiac comes from this Aphrodite. Okay, and she had a temple there, a big temple in Corinth, and why it's important because again, you might have had Christians who might have worshipped Aphrodite. Okay? Now you can't come to church and look who's a virgin, have sex with her and kill her. That's just not Christian. Okay? But how do you take that mindset from those Christians. Okay? You need to get that ideology away from them, and you will see when you read 1st and 2nd Corinthians, the big chapter, the well-known chapter is 1 Corinthians 13, which is about love. But what kind of love? Godly love, agape love. Okay? Now the Greeks and the Romans would understand the different kinds of love. Okay? I mean, in Greek there is 4 words to describe love. In English there is 1. And you can use I love my wife and I love spaghetti at the same time. Okay? Clearly I don't love spaghetti as much as I love my wife, but I use the same word. In the Greek language there are 4 words to describe different kinds of love. Okay? And 1 Corinthians 13 is known for the love chapter, but there's a reason, because Paul is trying to show the lustful love, the eros love, okay, which is to do with Aphrodite, to the filial love, which is a brotherly love, to the agape love, which is the unconditional love. And I always forget the 4th kind of love. There's a philia, agape, eros, and I can't remember the 4th one. There's 4 of them. I always forget the 4th one, the poor other love. But and there's a reason. So Paul uses all this knowledge to speak to the guys in Corinth who would have been probably stooped in this kind of ideology, to show them, it doesn't work that way anymore. Okay? That doesn't work with Jesus. Okay? So, and so much so that the Greek writers in the 5th and 4th century BC characterized Corinth as a city of commercialized love. And a Corinthian girl meant a prostitute. Okay? So when someone was called, so you're a Corinthian girl. Prostitute. Corinthian in history. Okay, so there you can see Athens and you can see Corinth. Okay, literally there's a little strip that is dividing them, and you can see, if you can see, this is a satellite image. If you can see here, there's literally an opening for ships to go through. Okay, so it's positioned, and Corinth is right here. So it's a very important position, because people will need to go to the capital through here. Okay, people will travel from here. Italy will be somewhere here. Okay, Israel is somewhere here. Turkey is over here. So it's an important sea route, and Corinth is right there. Okay. No, I don't think so. No, I don't think so. Do you know? I mean, you've been to. I don't know. Athens is still Athens, but I don't know if Corinth is still known as Corinth. I can find out for you. I'll tell you next week. Okay, the site of ancient Corinth was first inhabited in the Neolithic period, 5000 to 3000 BC. The peak period of the town, though, started in the 8th century BC and lasted until its destruction by the Roman general Mummius in 146 BC. Representative of its wealth is the Doric Temple of Apollo, which was built in 550. The city was re-inhabited in 44 BC and gradually developed again. In 51-52 AD, Apostle Paul visited Corinth. The center of the Roman city was organized to the south of the Temple of Apollo and included shops, small shrines, fountains, baths, and other public buildings. Okay, so the problem with the church in Corinth was that there was a lot of people from other religions. Okay, which is great because now they're Christians. but you need to get them away from understanding. And in a lot of the Greek and the Roman, because the Romans took a lot from the Greek. I mean, if you go to Israel and you go to a place called Caesarea Philippi, okay, it's where Jesus asked the disciples, who do people say that I am? And remember that conversation? And Peter says, you are the Son of the Lord. And he says to him, on this rock I will build my church. Okay. Now in there's still there's evidence of a temple which was built for Pan. Remember Pan? He used to play a special instrument, and he was half what and half what? He was half goat and half man. Okay. And the reason for it, because in worshipping Pan, it's going to sound disgusting, but there was actually a practice of bestiality. Okay? Bestiality is basically they had to have sex with goats to go and worship him. Okay? And in excavation there, you can actually still see outside the temple where the goats used to be held. Okay? And on the other side, where the prostitutes will get completely intoxicated and will come over and have sex with the goats. Okay, and they said that basically Pan was a demigod, god. He wasn't he was a half god, half man, and that because of sexual intercourse with the goat, that he became half goat, half man. Okay. By the way, he was known as the god of chaos. Panic. The word panic comes from Pan. Pandemonia comes from the word Pan. Okay, so those are words that came out of that. So can you see again? I mean, how can you have someone in church who had sex with a goat? Okay, but they were there. How do you not deal with them? How do you teach them? How do you direct them that that's no more? Okay? It's very similar that in a lot of our churches, especially our African churches, that there is still a lot of ancestral worship. Am I right? I mean, I know a few years ago we had at a General Assembly, which is basically the big meeting of the Presbyterian Church here in Southern Africa, and we were debating about few ministers and a congregation that were still practicing ancestral worship, but they were a Christian church. I mean, one of the guys was ordained at the same time I was ordained. Okay, and the discussion was, how do we get that ideology of ancestral worshiping into now Christianity, that you don't need your ancestors. Jesus is your big ancestor. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. Okay, so it's a similar thing to what we had to deal with. Okay, and I know in the Methodist Church as well, there was a huge discussion about ancestral worship. Corinth during the Roman Empire, under the Roman, it became the seat of government. So that's quite important as well for the southern Greece. It was noted for its wealth, so there were wealthy people, and for luxurious, immoral, and vicious habits of people. It had a large mixed population of Romans, Greeks, and Jews. When the Apostle Paul first visited the city, Galileo, the brother of Seneca, was a proconsul. Paul resided here for 18 months, so for a year and a half he was there. Here he first became acquainted with Aquila and Priscilla. Remember those two? Okay? And soon after his departure, Apollos came from Ephesus. Paul visited Corinth for a second benefit and remained for 3 months. During the second visit in the spring of 58, it is likely the epistle to the Romans was written. Okay, so the book of Romans was most likely written while he was actually still visiting in Corinth. Okay, the church in Corinth, and there's a old building that most likely was a church that was found in the city. And again, you can see above a modern building, and here is an ancient building, side by side. Paul arrived in Corinth during his second missionary journey. The church started in the synagogue, but moved elsewhere when the Jews rejected Paul. Okay, this church had a good start and includes as one of the members the synagogue ruler. Paul stayed in Corinth for 18 months, one of his longest stay in the city. The Jews brought him before Gallio, probably in 51 AD, after which he left the city. Now, if you look behind me, is what is known as the Erastus inscription. Okay, and this is not Greek, this is Latin, and there's the word Erastus. Okay, and the reason for why is important, because the Erastus inscription provides another archaeological link with the Apostle Paul. In 1929, this inscription was found mentioning Erastus as the one who paid for the paving of the street in return for his appointment as a city officer. Okay? It is likely that this is the same Erastus mentioned by Paul as sending greeting to the church at Rome in Romans 16:23. If so, Paul's influence apparently extended to wealthy and influential Roman citizens of Corinth. Okay? Now, if you look around this church, you will see this guy in quite a lot of places. The reason for it, he was the architect who designed the first church. This is not the original church. This church is about 165 years old. If you go outside on the wall, you will see the old church. Okay? He was the architect. Okay? Now, you can see he's got a plaque here, he's got a plaque there, he's got another plaque over there, he's mentioned in this book over here. So he's all over the place. Okay? It's the same thing with this Erastus, that he built that particular road. And he wanted to make sure that people knew that he built that road. Okay? Now Paul comes and he mentions this name because Paul knew Erastus. Okay? So imagine I never came to this church, but I knew of Ebenezer and his family, and I wrote a letter and I say, by the way, please send my love to his grandson. He was going, you know the Crouch family. Okay, well, any friend of Crouch is a friend of ours. Okay? And can you see how name dropping was still used in those days? Because now, all of a sudden, if you know Erastus, and Erastus has got few dinars in his pocket, okay, and he's got roads named after him and so on, if Paul knows him and he knows Paul, then you know what, Paul, come in, we practically family. Okay, and Paul uses this for his advantage because now he's in with the crowd, okay, and he's now able to witness to this crowd. Paul's relationship with Corinth, by studying the information provided in the book of Acts and the letters to the Corinthians, we can conclude that Paul had a long-standing relationship with this church. I mean, he spent 18 months and then another 3 months. He knew the guys, he knew the people. His contact and relationship with the church can be seen from his visits, as well as the correspondence between him and the members of the church. By listing the unknown evidence and possibly other assumed contexts, we can get an idea of how the relationship developed. Paul's first visit to Corinth and the planting of the church will happen about 51 to 52 AD. A previous letter by Paul while he is in Ephesus, this letter is lost to us, so we don't have evidence of this letter, but in 1 Corinthians 5:9 he talks about this previous letter that he obviously wrote to them. Okay, no one has found that letter, but there is evidence that he talks about it in the letters that we did find. The church answered Paul is in an unknown letter. Paul responded by writing 1 Corinthians while he was in Ephesus, addressing some problems in the church and answering some of their questions. Ongoing relationship, the church did not respond well to this letter. So he wrote to them and he said, I've heard this, and this is what you guys cannot carry on doing it. So they didn't like what they read. And Paul decided to visit them again. This could be the so-called painful visit that is referred to in 2 Corinthians 2:1, 12, 14, and 13, 1-3. Still, the response was not good, and Paul wrote his letter of tears, or the painful letters, 2 Corinthians 2, 3-4, 7-8. And he's disappointed. His heart breaks, and Paul writes quite dramatically. Okay, sort of like, how could you do this to me? After all we've been through and what I had to go through planting this church, and this is the thanks I get, kind of thing. Okay, sort of like really spreading it thick. Okay, this time the response by the Corinthians was positive, which is reported to Paul. Paul then wrote 2 Corinthians probably while he was in Philippi. This letter is often referred to as the letter of joy. Okay, and if you read 2 Corinthians, you can see very different to 1 Corinthians. In 2 Corinthians, he's much more, consider it pure joy, my brothers. Okay, and you often hear that word joy. Okay. Is joy in Greek zoche? Do you know? Zoe is life. Hey, yeah, I can't remember it now. I haven't used Greek for a long time. All right, 1 Corinthians, addressing problems in a young church. It was a relatively young church, so we're not talking about the young people who were in that church. We're talking about the fact that the church was reasonably young. Okay, there is very little doubt that Paul is the author of this letter. He wrote to the Corinthians church in response to some concerns on his part, but also to answer questions they had about the Christian life and practice. Paul was on his third missionary journey in Ephesus, penning the letter about 55 AD. Purpose of Corinthians. Paul gave an indication of his purpose in 1 Corinthians 1:10 and following. In the letter, he addresses the following: divisions in the church. The first part of the letter focuses on these reported division. And what was happening is, you can imagine, you getting people from different cultures, different backgrounds, okay, and there's division in there, okay. We were talking earlier, and one of the ladies got quite passionate about it, as I thought she would, and I had to stop her because it was going to take our lecture somewhere else. And again, I'm talking to our brothers and sisters from our African church. You will know about associations. Okay, associations in the black churches are very much like the men's group will be an association, the women's group will be an association, the young men's group will be an association, the young women's group will be an association. And what happens a lot, okay, is that there is division within those associations. Now, they are a sort of ministry of the church, okay, but unfortunately the church lost its hold on these associations. So instead of the church controlling the associations ends up controlling the church. We had one, not in this province, but in the Highveld, in Gauteng. We had one minister that the women association didn't like what his wife said. They stopped paying the salary to the minister. Okay, for 6 months, they stopped paying the salary to the minister. Okay, and eventually the presbytery got hold of this, and we had to now send a commission of inquiries and all that kind of stuff. That's how powerful those associations are. It's not new. It was happening in here as well. Okay, and how do I know? Because in Corinthians there's a certain time where Paul writes, and the problem was there were Greek-speaking widows, and there were Jews Greek-speaking widows. Okay, and what was happening is the Jewish-speaking Greek widows were getting the food before the non-Jews Greek-speaking widows, and it was causing a friction. Okay, and then Paul writes in one of his letters, he writes to them and he gives them an understanding of what it is, and he reminds them there is no Jew or Gentile. Okay, there is no master or slave, and so on. Okay, so there is division. Also within the Presbyterian Church, year 2000, the Presbyterian Church had two different branches: the Reformed Presbyterian Church and the Presbyterian Church of Southern Africa. Okay, in 2000 they united, and that's why the Presbyterian Church is called the Uniting Presbyterian Church of Southern Africa. As much as it's called a Uniting Presbyterian Church, there is still no unity. Okay, and especially in this province, you still get the old Transkei Ciskei. Okay, and the fighting between the two. Okay, and the fighting happens a lot with what kind of uniform the people has to wear to church. Okay, the red and black. Have you seen guys walking around with red, white, and black? Okay, and you get the black and the white. Okay, now when they're united, which color are we going to wear now? We've been wearing the white, the red, and the black, and we've been wearing the black and the white. Why should we wear your color or the other way around? Okay, and I remember in one General Assembly, which is a meeting of the entire denomination, that a whole half a day was discussed around this issue of what uniform to wear. Okay, now the reason behind the uniform was to actually show that there is no poor or rich. You all wear the same uniform. Okay, because you go to church. Okay, often people come with the Sunday best. Okay, you can sort of, by looking at them, you can see who's what and who's not. Okay, on Sunday when I'm going to be preaching, we're going to talk about the class system that James talks about. Okay, and how very much in Greece and Rome, if you were a senator, okay, and you were a slave, there was a huge gap between. Okay, so a big part of this uniform thing was from there, but it goes further than that. When the white man came to this country, okay, and they came on the name of Jesus, okay, they were colonizing that. They didn't allow the black person to come in with skins. Okay, they had to get dressed up like the Europeans did. Okay, and that's how they moved away from. And I remember in that particular General Assembly, one of the white ministers was saying, "Oh, really? Are we going to talk about this again?" And they're saying, "You know what? It's actually our fault that we're talking about it in the first place, because we should have accepted a person to come to church the way he or she wanted to come to church. But instead, we told them, no, if you want to be a Christian, you have to be dressed like a Westerner." Okay. Similar things were happening here. Okay, different words were used, but similar things. And there was a huge division, because you get people who worshipped Apollos, you get people who worshipped Aphrodite, you have people who worshipped Yahweh. Okay? And now all of them are coming together. Alright? And here's a guy with a yarmulke on, and here's a woman who's got a toga. Toga, yeah, on. Okay? Can she wear that to church? Can he wear that to church? Because you don't have to wear a yarmulke anymore to church. Okay? And it caused division. And Paul talks about them, and that's where Paul comes. There is no Jew or Gentile. There is no Greek. Okay? There is no Jew. There is no slave. There is no master. It's all one. And he talks about it in Ephesians. He's talking about it. He says, the wall of division, of hostility, has been broken, and together we build up the temple of God. Okay, each and every one of us is with him being the cornerstone. Okay, so we don't take our allegiance from where we come from, but we line ourselves up with Jesus. And all these terms, all these words that he uses is because of all these things that were happening in these churches. Nothing new. Okay, and that's why the churches are being called to go back to basics. Okay, across denominations. Sinful and wrong behavior by members of the church. Okay, questions asked by the church about different things. And Paul writes all about this. The letter developed out of Paul's concern from the reports that he had received about the church, as well as their questions to him. He used the opportunity to give guidelines and teaching, without which we would have been much poorer. Chapter 1 to 4 are key to understanding this letter, as well as Paul's view of his own ministry and the meaning of the cross. Okay? And you will see that he talks a lot about the cross. There's a major themes in there. Paul uses a lot of talk about the cross because in the Roman understanding of the cross was a curse. Cursed is the man who hangs off a tree. Okay? The cross was a torture instrument. It was actually used to embarrass you because ye dare to go against Rome. Historians would say that the streets of Rome and many of the Romans' roads were lined up with crosses, like we get light poles. Okay? This is the might of Rome. If you dare cross it, this is what's going to happen to you. So now, they're all following a man who hung on a cross. How can you move away from it being a curse to the fact that that cross is the key to your salvation? Okay? And Paul tries to explain it, and he uses a lot of the thing. The foundation of our faith is a cross. He talks about sexual behavior. We spoke about all of this, prostitution and all of that. Christians and lawsuits. Okay? Christians should not take another Christian to court. I wish that was true. Marriages, the whole thing about marriages. Meat and idols, because a lot of them would bring meat to idols, okay? But in the same church, you got a Jew who used to practice kosher food. He says, hey, you can't bring this meat to church because that was sacrificed to Apollos. He says, and they all forgot about what they were speaking about the Cornelius, and that there is no undirty food before God. The church at worship included communion. Okay, spiritual gifts. Chapter 13 is the love chapter, and then the resurrection. So if you haven't read 1 Corinthians, there's a few passages that will help you. And then we'll finish off with 2 Corinthians, the consolidation letters, and this may have been the fourth or fifth letter in an exchange of communication between Paul and the church. Paul wrote this letter about 56 AD after having left Ephesus to travel north. He had a positive response from the church after his previous letter. Paul wrote to express his joy over the change attitude on the part of the church. The tone of the first 9 chapters is very positive. The messages is participation in the gospel may cause suffering, physical, emotional, but in Christ there is victory. God is the source of all comfort and joy. The new covenant shines in glory in a different way to that of the old covenant. There is a deeper understanding of the stewardship and giving in the new covenant. And also ministry in the new covenant may come with suffering and hardship, which helps to keep us humble. The focus of his ministry, Paul used this letter to elaborate on his involvement in ministry in the kingdom of God. Basis of his ministry was the cross. Purpose of the ministry, the glory of God. Price of the ministry was sacrifice. And authority in the ministry, the herald. In other words, the pronouncing of the coming. Role in ministry, connecting people to God. And if you haven't read 2 Corinthians, these are good chapters. Basically, 2 Corinthians, as I said, is almost like the finishing letters. Okay, but remember that he wrote to them 3 letters. There were no good responses. Finally, they respond well. He hears the report from Timothy or from Barnabas or from Peter. He hears the report about the church, and he's writing them and says, I want to encourage you. Stay on. Run the race. Remember about the thing, running the race? Focus. Finish the race. You started, finish the race. All of this comes from here. But can you see now the context why he writes all of this? He says, well done. I want to encourage you. Okay, consider it pure joy. You hear Paul constantly talking about the joy. Okay, yes, you might be suffering, but consider it pure joy. Okay, don't worry about the to-do, because that was for exam purposes. So don't worry about that slide. And next week what we're going to do is we continue to look at the Pauline corpse, and we'll focus on the next 4 of his letters. Galatians, Ephesians. Ephesians has to do a lot with family, and scriptures like, fathers, do not exasperate your children. Wives, submit to your husband.
Remember that.
Yeah, we'll talk a lot about that. Philippians, and we're going to talk about Philippians as well, and Colossians. So that's what we're going to do next week. Enjoy the rest of the week. I'll see some of you tomorrow night for the teaching, the Zeli teaching. We're going to be visiting Jerusalem, and we're going to be looking at the Last Supper and the upper room. Okay. And otherwise, I'll see some of you on Sunday, or some of you next week. He always had a desire to visit Rome, but this dream was not fulfilled during his time, his years of freedom. Paul wrote to the Roman church to prepare the way for his planned to visiting to them, as well as to ask them for assistance in his desire to preach the gospel in Spain. So an example, remember about a month or so ago, we had Omri, who came here, another Israeli convert who came here and taught us a little bit about the importance of Jewish evangelism. Now, I got from his PA, from Della, I got an email because of a person that they knew in Durban, that knew me, and knew that I was living here now and ministering here. And he said to him, here's his email. I don't have his number, but here's his email. Okay? Della emails me and she said, listen, this is who we are. This is who Omri is. I believe you are from an Israeli background itself, and you have a church. We are going to be on our way to Cradock. Okay? And from Cradock we're going to Port Elizabeth. Okay? And we believe you're sort of in that area. Can we come and spend one night here and just advertise and see who wants to come? Okay? And she literally gave me a weekend to advertise. And thanks to the power of Facebook, okay, and few people in Facebook who love sharing, okay, and they shared, we had a good turnout of people from different congregations, okay, who wanted to hear about it. It's the same thing Paul is basically saying, I'm coming through to Rome. I mean, this is my intention. And there's a strong belief that he was actually in Ephesus, okay, at that time that he wrote the book of Romans, the letters to the Romans. And he says, this is where I am at the moment, and I want to go to Spain, but I've always wanted to minister in Rome. And I know that you've got a church there. Do you mind if I come and stay with you for a little bit? And then after that, maybe you guys know some people in Spain and you can speak to them and so on. That is basically what happened. Okay, and that's how he came across the church in Rome. Okay, this is an excavation that was found about the tea and the coffee, and basically it's tea time. Any questions, guys?